You've heard it 1,000 times, right? Printing money causes inflation. It's repeated so often, it feels like a law of physics. But what if I told you the real story is way more complicated, and that the last few years gave us the most incredible real-world test of that old cliché? Let's get into it. So, this is the big question. Does just creating more money automatically, inevitably lead to prices going up for everyone? It seems so simple, but the answer? Well, it's not what you might think. I mean, it's just one of those things everyone knows it's true. It's the kind of thing you hear from TV pundits, your uncle at a family dinner. It's just accepted wisdom. But today, we're going to put that wisdom to the test. Okay, so to really understand what's going on, we gotta ask, where did this powerful idea even come from? It didn't just appear out of nowhere. We have to go back in time a bit. Turns out this idea got its intellectual horsepower over a century ago from some of the sharpest economic minds at Cambridge University. They came up with something called the cash balance theory, and it basically gave a formal academic backbone to this old cliché. And the logic behind it is actually pretty simple and, intuitive. Just picture it. An economy has a certain amount of stuff, goods and services for sale. If you suddenly double the amount of money everyone has to spend on that exact same amount of stuff, well, something's got to give. The only way to balance it out is for prices to go up. Makes sense, right? It's a neat theory, but then a once-in-a-century global event came along and turned the entire world into a massive, unplanned economic experiment. Yeah, I'm talking about 2020. The world basically hit the pause button. And to stop a complete and total economic meltdown, central banks everywhere did something absolutely historic. They started creating money on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And I'm not talking about small potatoes here. We are talking about trillions, just an absolute tidal wave of new money pumped into the global system to keep the lights on for businesses and families. So here's the puzzle. Here's the mystery. If that old Cambridge theory is an iron law, this should have been like throwing a match into a fireworks factory. We should have seen immediate, runaway inflation. But we didn't. So what happened? Why? To solve this puzzle, we have to dig a little deeper than that simple cliché. We need to understand that inflation isn't just one thing. There's more than one way for prices to go up. You can think of it as a tale of two inflations. On one hand, you have demand-pull inflation. That's the classic one we've been talking about. Too much money chasing too few goods, pulling prices up. But then you have cost-push inflation. That's totally different. That's when the cost of making things, think energy, shipping, materials, goes up. And companies have to push those higher costs onto you, the customer. So why didn't we get that instant demand-pull spike? Well, a few things were going on under the surface. First, the economy wasn't running at full steam. There was a lot of idle capacity. The new money was just getting factories and people back to work. Second, what economists call the velocity of money was super low. People were scared, so they were receiving that new money, not rushing out to spend it. But the real villain of the story? That was still waiting in the wings. And this is really the key to the whole thing. When inflation did finally take off in 2021 and 2022, it wasn't really because of all that money printed a year before. No, it was a classic case of cost push. Global supply chains completely broke down. You couldn't get a shipping container to save your life. Energy prices went crazy. That was the real trigger. This leads us to what I think is the coolest part of this whole story. How does money created out of thin air by a central bank actually affect the price of a gallon of milk? It's not a direct hose. It's more like a massive complex network of hidden plumbing. Now it's got a super fancy name, the monetary transmission mechanism. But don't let that intimidate you. All it really means is the journey, the series of events that a central bank's decision has to take to actually show up in your wallet. And this journey doesn't just happen on one road. The money flows through all these different channels at the same time. You've got the interest rate channel, the asset price channel, think stocks and housing, the credit channel, and maybe the most powerful of all, the expectations channel, what we all collectively believe is going to happen next. Let's just look at one piece of this plumbing to see how it works. This is a simplified look at something called Tobin's Q theory. Now, don't worry about reading on the text, just follow the arrows. The basic idea is that when the central bank acts, it can make stock prices go up. And when a company's stock is high, it's way more attractive for them to invest in new projects and hire people. That creates growth. See? It's an indirect but really powerful chain reaction. Okay, now let's zoom out and look at a map of the entire plumbing system. Again, don't sweat the labels, just get a feel for the journey. A policy decision starts way up at the top, and inflation is all the way down at the bottom. Just look at how many twists and turns and connections there are in between. It is not a straight line. It's a long, winding, and sometimes unpredictable road. All right, so after looking at the old theory, the crazy pandemic experiment, and all that hidden plumbing, what's the final verdict here? What did we learn? At the end of the day, it really boils down to this. Context is everything. The impact of creating new money is not some absolute, unchanging law. Pumping money into an economy that's already red hot and running at full capacity is one thing. Pumping it into an economy that's completely stalled out in a crisis, well, that's a completely different animal. And you can actually see this new, more complex understanding in the way central banks themselves now talk and act. Just look at this table. The old framework was simple. One tool, interest rates, for one goal, price stability. That's it. But look at the new framework. They now have a whole toolbox of different instruments to juggle two big goals at once, keeping prices stable and keeping the financial system from blowing up. The job just got a lot harder. And there's a quote from economist Ugur Gunduz that just nails it. He says, "To understand a dynamic field like economics with a static, one-dimensional cliché will lead us to the wrong conclusions." And that's exactly it. The economy isn't a simple machine. It's a living, breathing, constantly changing thing. Which leaves us with a final, massive question to chew on. When we see central banks taking these huge, dramatic actions, is that action the cause of our problems, or is it just a desperate consequence of a much deeper problem they're trying to fix?